Well, Egypt has been stepping up its number of checkpoints along its border with Gaza. That satellite images are revealing this. Now, in November, construction crews began working on a raised strip of land some 200 meters away from the fence dividing Egypt from the Gaza Strip. It's now 3.5 kilometers long. That brings the total length of the earth barrier to some 14 kilometers. We understand Egypt is also building a new concrete wall along the old border wall. Well, Israel's advance to the south of Gaza has been raising tensions with Egypt. The two countries signed a formal peace treaty back in 1979 based on what's called the Camp David Accords. It lays out a complicated set of agreements about land and borders. Now, importantly, it limits the presence of Egypt's military in the Sinai Peninsula. A separate agreement was also then signed in 2005 after Israeli soldiers and settlers withdrew from the Gaza Strip. And that covered how the Rafah border crossing was to be run, as well as how Egypt could deploy guards along that border. But Israel is now talking about relocating huge numbers of Palestinians away from Rafah. Egypt has warned that any attempt to move people across the border could lead to the termination of the treaty and the other agreements, too, between the two countries. Well, let's now bring in Mahjoub Zweri. He's the director of the Gulf Studies Centre and a professor of Middle East politics at Qatar University. Mahjoub, always great to have you. As we've been reporting, Egypt has been clear that any forced mass displacement of people from Gaza is a red line for them. We see they're already fortifying the border area. What does that red line mean to Cairo? What kind of action could we see?
You know, since November, there was different messages coming from Cairo about the situation in Gaza. And the most important two messages: one, no displacement, people will not be allowed to go to Sinai. And the other important message, there will be no military operation on what's so-called Philadelphia cross-border with Egypt. And the security of that basically area will be under the Egyptians. And those two messages basically were obvious between both sides. What was interesting, the hidden messages were basically Israel was accusing Egypt of being responsible of the or problematic issue on the Rafah cross-border, where Egyptians now claim that the problem is Israel. So there is a war between both sides. But when it comes to the Philadelphia and when it comes to the procedures that Egyptians are following, it's obvious that they don't want to have any Palestinian going to Sinai so far.
Well, if that red line is crossed, what could we see happen, Mahjoub?
In the last 24 hours, the red line was if any Israelis push towards that, the whole peace treaty will be basically put on hold. The news came from the Israeli side. The Egyptians basically kept silent. But to be honest, I think maybe this is a way to test the water if this happens. I think when it comes from Channel 13 of Israel, that was, I call it a test of how the Egyptian will respond to that. I'm not sure so far that the Egyptians has responded seriously about what happened in Gaza, whether when it comes to the humanitarian aid or when it comes to the politics. To the humanitarian aid, they are not doing enough to push more aid to come into Gaza. There is a bureaucracy on their borders that is even by the United Nations has been acknowledging that and saying, the Egyptians should do more, and that's not to blame only the Israelis. So I think the Egyptians, they try to check two things. One, what is the American position will be, and how far the Americans can pressure Netanyahu. And the second element is how much Arabs and nations, Europeans and the EU in particular, can pressure Israelis. I think the Egyptians, they keep eye on those two main factors and see how much they can pressure Netanyahu. I'm not sure the Egyptian can really play a major role on stopping Rafah military operation that the Israelis want to do. I'm not sure they would be able to stop it alone. They need some support internationally from the United States, from the United Nations, from the Europeans. Otherwise, alone, I'm not sure they can do it.
Well, I've been wondering about the White House response here, because we know that Egypt has close economic and military ties with the US. Where is Washington on this? They've been saying for some time they won't accept the forced displacement of people from Gaza, but what does that actually mean in practice?
And according to the Washington Post, just in the last 25 minutes I was reading, they say we have no impact in secret or in public on Netanyahu. We have no impact, and we are missing that momentum. And that is the assessment of people close to Biden, who now they push him to criticize Biden, to criticize Netanyahu in public. So basically, there is a serious need to Biden to be more brave and basically cross the red lines he puts for himself from day one when he and his administration accepted the Israeli narrative and following that narrative. They need to reach to the point that that narrative has not offered Biden any actually help in the elections, and he needs now to cross that line and decide about how to pressure the Israelis so he can win the vote of the young people in the United States if he wants to remain. He wants to remain in the White House.
Well, Mahjoub, let me ask you about these protests that we've also been seeing at Karam Abu Salam. Do you think they could impact the aid relationship, that the role that Egypt is playing? You were talking earlier about that war of words over who's actually stopping aid from getting into Gaza.
Those demonstrations are a reflection of the division which Netanyahu government has created between the families of captives and the families of the soldiers. So those are the family of the soldier. Netanyahu government, they want to say that we have an active society which basically still in favor of the war, and they in favor of actually not allowing humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. So it's a reflection, it's a political game that Benjamin Netanyahu is playing to basically divide and rule. And one of the signs of that is what happened in the Karam Abu Salam, basically cross borders.
Mahjoub Zweiri, they're speaking to us from Qatar University, a professor of Middle Eastern politics. Always great to get your thoughts. Thank you for joining us again, Mahjoub.
Thank you, Nastasia. Thank you. Thank you.